Hi guys, today I'm here with Jon Eden Khan, a human being that I respect deeply, someone with a broad worldview and understanding of cosmos, who studied extensively different wisdom traditions of the world, integral theory, psychology, neuroscience, embodiment, you name it, all the good stuff, and philosophy. I'm not going to go into much detail. I want to be precise and talk about some abstract pictures in philosophy and give definitions to some technical terms that I would love to use further. And in my worldview, Jon is like the person to nerd out and simplify. So, hi, Jon. Welcome.
Hi, Katya. Good to be with you.
So I would like to talk about some esoteric terms. And in our world, it oftentimes means that esoteric is something like a scam.
Yeah.
And in my world, it's the inner knowledge and inner guidance when you're looking inside. So, Jon, could you give a definition? What does esoteric mean to you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I came to learn this as well when I moved to Germany. Like in it's not the case in England, where I'm from. In England, the word esoteric kind of means mystical in some way. But when I moved to Germany, I learned that for German people, the word esoteric it's like a put down in a certain way. It's like if they call something esoteric, it's like, this is not really worth paying attention to, you know. Really, the kind of the deeper meaning of what esoteric means is it just means it relates to the inner truth of things. So, esoteric is contrasted with exoteric. There's exoteric, which relates to the kind of the outer truth of things, and esoteric, which relates to the inner truth of things. And, like with an insect, they're said to have, or there's certain like groups of species of insects that have like an exoskeleton. They have like their skeleton is outside their body, in various ways, or it's on the outside. Whereas eso, the prefix eso relates to what is inner. So in a way that, when the word esoteric is used in a way that isn't a put down, but is actually in its real kind of its essence of what it's about, really, it relates to the inner truth of things. And you could say like spiritual traditions through time, every healthy spiritual tradition has both an exoteric aspect and an esoteric aspect. So the exoteric aspect of a spiritual tradition, whether it's Christianity, Buddhism, or Islam, or whatever other tradition, is kind of its outer teachings that generally relate to things like how to live a good life, morals, what on earth we're all doing here, like some kind of creation story, like what happened, how did we get here, how is this here, and how to participate in community and society in a way that the tradition says is that's a good way to do things. That's like the exoteric part of a spiritual tradition. The esoteric part of a spiritual tradition is to do with more transformational practices and teachings that are really to do with how does a person move into actual like real deep experiences of the sacred, of whatever that tradition understands as what is sacred. And that could be deeper experiences of who they are as a soul, or greater communion with how that tradition presents, some kind of ultimate reality or God or whatever. But it's like essentially they're transformational practices that are about radically deconstructing or opening a person's experience to break down the barriers between them and their connection to what is obviously and experientially sacred. So esoteric in that regard relates to that aspect of what a spiritual tradition does. And I think just the last thing I'd say on this question is a challenge for us, particularly in the modern West, and I use that word broadly, is that our spiritual traditions, particularly Christianity and Islam, I was going to say the Abrahamic traditions, but it's less the case for Judaism, have had their connection between the exoteric aspect and the esoteric aspect kind of broken. You know, for instance, with Islam, you could say like the esoteric branch of Islam, or one, is Sufism, right? The Sufis. But it's also the case that the Sufis have been persecuted within Islam for a long time. You know, their orientation towards transformational inner practices that open the person's experience have been labeled as, have been seen as dangerous in some way. And that's also the case in Christianity, in the history of Christianity, where the esoteric dimensions of, you know, transformational practice of deeper and deeper communion with soul and with Christ and with God, you know, that used to be very alive in the kind of more mystical, esoteric branches of Christianity, were heavily persecuted. There's a history of them being hunted down and even imprisoned or killed and so on. So that's why it's less, you know, if that wasn't the case, then for people in the West, this would not be a strange word. It would just be like, oh, you know, like for instance, in the East, with traditions like Hinduism and Buddhism, the esoteric branches of those traditions have not been persecuted. They've just been gone alongside the exoteric aspects. And it's, you know, it's not strange when you look at a tradition like Buddhism or Hinduism, for instance, that there are also these kind of transformational practices for opening up a person's experience. That's just normal. Whereas for us in the West, in the modern West, broadly, I say that, particularly within the fields of like Christianity or Islam, it's more like, hey, what are you even talking about? But there's a really important historical reason for that, which is that these two aspects of the tradition haven't existed well with each other.
Yeah, being brought up in Christian culture,
yeah,
as an atheist, yeah, I can feel it. Like there is, it's not so much my experiential side, but something that the church tells me. Like having
exactly.
this connection to God happens through church and not from inside.
Yeah.
And Jon, you mentioned the inner realms and you've mentioned the term soul. And that's something I wanted to ask you about. I have sounded a call to people around me to come and listen to the soul. And I would really like to give the definition to the terms personality and soul in like broadly. Could you cover that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so pretty much every spiritual tradition through time has some idea of what soul is. Like they pretty much all have some triple model of what a human being is. That, you know, the human beings are, we have an embodied layer, we have a soul layer, we have a spirit layer, and they have some differences, you know, in terminology and differences in slight details, but mostly every tradition has some version of human beings have at least 3 layers in that regard. Yeah, and with regard to soul, it would basically be understood that if I start with personality, you know, personality in the way that we use the term relates to like the outer kind of part of a human being, that's how they do their thing day to day in the world. And that's like my mind, my emotions, and my body. And if you think about it, like most of the time when we're doing our thing in the world, we're operating through our mind, our emotions, or our body. And all of us have different levels of balance between those aspects. And for some people, they're much more in their mind. And for some people, they're much more in their feelings. And for some people, they're much more in their body. But basically, you know, a major part of what society kind of tries to invite us into is to have a basically balanced and integrated, you know, vehicle of all those 3 together. And that would be like an integrated personality, a person. And basically what that means is they can get stuff done. You know, like they don't like, they can't, it's not like they just can't get out of bed in the morning because they're just feeling way too emotional, or like, you know, they just can't remember what they're supposed to do today, or, you know, like whatever it is. It's like you've got a mind that works, it's integrated with, you can feel, but you're not flooded or overtaken by your feelings. And you've got a physical body that, you know, you're good with, right?
So it's like a functional tool to be present in the world.
Exactly. You're a functional human being, right? Soul is the understanding that deeper than all of that is some deeper part of us that is essentially on a journey. That there's some deeper part of us that is not our mind, is deeper than our mind, is not our emotions, is deeper than our emotions, is not our body, is deeper than our body, that carries an innocence and a love and an intelligence and a wisdom, essentially, that also carries a kind of blueprint for what our life is, the potentials of our life, and you know, what would be the deepest growth opportunity of our life, what is essentially like a kind of destiny blueprint for what my life is meant to be. And you know, one of the things that I do with people a lot is I help people uncover their soul purpose, you know. So my experience and understanding is that there's a deep place in everyone's being, which I feel is related to their soul, where there is a natural, deeply fulfilling expression of purpose and love and creativity that everyone can connect to if they connect to that place in themselves. That's not, you know, like sometimes we make the distinction between authentic purpose or soul purpose and default purpose. And default purpose is like the stuff that you do because you think you should do it, right? So like, you want to be a dentist because you came from a family of dentists, or, you know, whatever. Like you think you should be a teacher because when you were 10, your mother said, I think you should be a teacher, or your culture tells you that you should do this, or, you know, whatever, or you love that TV character that was like a motorcycle racer. So, you know, whatever. It's outer influences that make you think you should do something. Whereas soul purpose or authentic purpose is an inner sense of inspiration, an inner sense of passion. And I think, you know, that's just one example of like, soul relates to some deeper inner part of us that operates through our mind, our emotions, and our body. But all of those, you know, like all of us can easily imagine and tune in, like my mind, how my mind works. It's quite conditioned by my past and my experiences and my culture and my national background and Same with my emotions. Same with how, you know, like how I relate to my body. But soul is something deeper than that. Soul is something where I'm not my conditioning. I'm not my ethnic background. I'm not my nationality. I'm not even just a more universal sense of humanity. There's something deeper in me, or something deeper in you, which has an essential innocence and clarity and simple wisdom and love, which is on a journey of remembering itself more deeply. And when people connect to that, the natural impulse is people feel more interconnected with other people. They feel more interconnected with other people. They feel more interconnected with the world. And it becomes a fulfilling impulse to give, to serve, to find your place in contributing to our collective journey. So that's something that comes more from soul. When people are operating more from personality, when I'm operating more from personality, I'm kind of more interested in what Jon wants. You know, like, what does Jon want? What does Jon like? Like, maybe I'm thinking about that all the time. You know, like, Jon thinks this, Jon wants that, I'm all about Jon, you know? And that's that there's a healthy version of that for sure, which is just making sure that I'm in good relationship with Jon, that Jon's boundaries and needs and, you know, kind of sense of fulfillment in life is there. But soul takes us into a deeper relationship with other beings and with life and with our collective journey.
I guess I would love to ask a little bit more details on like two directions. One is I'm interested in how in your experience you feel, what are the characteristics of when you're operating from personality and when you're doing it from the soul, like how can I feel it so I could resonate from you. And I also know that you're working with world leaders on their purpose, on their soul purpose, and like why why would we want it? Why isn't it just enough to just function as Jon or Katya here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. So to your first question of like, what is the kind of the experience difference to be operating from personality or soul? Like I say, like with personality, it's much more about what I as an individual self wants, what I like what I think. I care about what I think, and maybe I should tell you what I think, you know, and maybe you should think what I think, or, you know, I'm invested in my thoughts, I'm invested in my feelings, I'm invested in my likes and my dislikes and my what I'm comfortable with and uncomfortable with, and for the most part it relates to what feels good for me and what doesn't feel good for me. You know, it's quite individual centric, basically, egocentric in certain.
Transactional, like I'm connected
Yeah,
separate
yeah,
units in the world,
yeah,
and then we need to make it profitable for
yeah.
both.
Absolutely, absolutely. And transactional is a good word for it, you know, because often that's we in personality, our relationships are transactional. Like they, for a large part, it's like, this is what I give you, this is what you give me. And there may be some deeper and broader ideals that go with that, but actually a lot of personality-based relationships fall apart if one or both people exit the deal. You know, and you know, and that happens with marriages or friendships or whatever. Like, you know, when I stop giving you what you're here to get from me, whether that's a sense of safety or validation or a sense that, you know, you're the most beautiful person in the world to me, or, you know, whatever it is, or satisfying sexuality or whatever, when the deal gets broken, then the apparent love goes. Yeah, because it's like, well, that's not working for me anymore, right? Whereas soul, you kind of know that you're in soul when there's a deeper love that's moving you, that isn't about what you get. Like it's not about getting something, and it's not about me as the center of things. It's about, you know, there's a sense of bringing myself into participation with something greater that is its own fulfillment. Like there's that I've started to feel myself as part of, as interconnected with a bigger field of love, essentially. Like some, you know, you could say I work with the understanding that there's different kinds of soul energy that people can hold, but they're all essentially some version of love, you know. And because love is what interconnects us, love is what brings us into relationship, love is something that grows us through our relationship with each other and with the whole, with humanity, with the earth, with this whole journey that we're a part of. And so yeah, so your awareness, your motivations become more about the group rather than being about me. It becomes more about like, who are those I'm in relationship with? You know, how do we open together more deeply? How do we grow more fully together? How can I give in a way that contributes to something greater than me growing and evolving and feeling more fulfillment in life?
So it's appealing. So the pull is for me to feel fulfilled. So there's kind of a deeper urge and there is a
Yeah.
communion and inspiration.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And whenever to segue to your other question around like purpose work, that I do purpose work with leaders, and I've asked so many people this question over the years, like how have you ever had an experience, even if it was just 1 second, even if it was just for 1 second, where you felt deeply, deeply connected to yourself? And I've basically never met an adult who said no. Like everyone said yes, and I think that's like such good news, isn't that? That's like such good news that basically every person has had at least 1 second of like, I have felt deeply connected with myself. You know? And in those moments, there's something else that comes online in us. There's a deeper inspiration, as you say, there's a deeper love and appreciation for a wider thing that we're a part of, a deeper impulse to give, a deeper sense of fulfillment that comes with participating in something bigger, a deeper sense of creativity and purpose that starts to be born in us, that isn't just about meeting my individual needs. So that's more when soul, in my experience, is starting to come online for someone.
So it's that moment when I'm feeling like myself, deeply like myself.
Yeah.
And a little bit paradoxically, it's like when I'm so myself, that I'm deeply connected to those around me.
Yeah.
There's no apparent separation.
Yeah.
Could we apply like the notions of egoism and altruism? Like, could I say that personality is more egoistic and soul is more altruistic?
I think you kind of could, and I think it's a little dangerous to do that as well, because I think, and that kind of takes me to the second part of your question about why I do what I do with regard to working with leaders around purpose. And a way that I describe soul purpose sometimes is it's that thing for each person which is simultaneously their greatest gift to give and their greatest fulfillment to give it. Yeah, it's all at once. It's both. It's not just a selfless act. It's deeply fulfilling at the same time. And so that's actually where I think we have some collective leftovers from our kind of Abrahamic tradition conditioning. And actually, it's not just Abrahamic tradition, they have it in the East as well. But I think we've tried to offset a sense of the basic selfishness of human beings with an ideal of you should give in a way that's completely unrelated to your own fulfillment, and that's become an ideal. And I actually think there's a deeper possibility. And the deeper possibility is that we give in a way that's full-hearted and deeply loving, in a way that enriches those we're connected to, but that also deeply enriches us. And I think, to me, that's even more beautiful, because it means like the whole system is enriched, everyone's enriched. And in no way does that enrichment of me as someone who's giving something take away from the purity and the depth of what I'm giving, or other people receiving it. So I think with soul, to me, that really connects me more deeply to what it really means to participate in an interconnected field, where as you say, like the barriers of separation between me and other beings are really starting to break down. And I'm deeply fulfilled to participate in something greater. And that also gives something good to the field, So, yeah. And I work with leaders doing that, because the bigger picture for me is I have always felt very clear in my life that humanity, and this is not an esoteric thing. This is obvious now for us collectively. Like, humanity is at a point of collective crisis with regard to our place on this planet, and the future of how we do things, and whether we actually are going to be able to operate in a way that is sustainable and yeah, like essentially whether we will go down a path of self-destruction in terms of continuing to be operating out of our collective personality, even in a certain way, where we're so focused on ourselves and what we want and our inner battles with each other or whatever, that we are not able to participate in the needs of the wider system of the earth in a harmonious way. And so I felt for my life that, you know, we're at a point of collective crisis, and my way of contributing to us finding our way with that has been about, like, I'm really passionate about how do leaders emerge, how do people who are online and on fire with love and purpose and creativity coming through them, that's contributing to serving our collective healing and growth and evolution in a way where we can navigate and resolve some of these problems. How does that happen as fast as possible? And for me, you know, my passion is around leadership, and other people work in other areas, but I feel leadership is a really important piece. And by leadership, I don't just mean people who are in positions of influence, like who, you know, whether they're politicians or, you know, people who are systems leaders or whatever. For me, leadership is a state of being. And when a person is, that's open to anyone, when a person is really online and in the flow of the creativity and the purpose and the love that wants to come through their soul, and they're acting on that in a way where they're not waiting for someone to give them permission, or to put them in a position where suddenly it's like, okay, now we're all waiting for you to do something good, you know. They become a leader. They enter into leadership as a state of being, and my sense is that that's one way we'll make our way through the current challenges, by more and more people stepping up to bring the solutions to the challenges we collectively face from a place that is actually really alive and fulfilling and passionate within them.
So we're walking from that personal influence into this state of collective inspiration. Like we're coming from a union, like a wave that has the whole water behind it.
Yeah, I mean, if I was to just speak in a totally uncensored, esoterically friendly way, I would say that we are in a crisis that's going to force a kind of the emergence of the collective soul of humanity, essentially. And anyone who's done enough soul work individually, you know, it's like basically everyone on a path who has entered into a place of doing a deep soul work, pretty much always their first teacher has been pain. You know, it's like most people enter into the deeper emergence of their soul in their life through crisis, whether it's a health crisis or a relationship crisis or you know, a professional crisis. Essentially, something becomes fundamentally unfulfilling at a certain point, or ways they've tried to live a happy life fail. Essentially, relationships fall apart, and they're not able to. They're the answers that they have kind of worked in the past don't work anymore, and yeah, they're forced. Each of us essentially is forced to open to something more unknown, open to something deeper, to start to listen to a deeper possibility of guidance or intuition or intelligence that wants to come online through our life, that maybe our mind doesn't understand or can't put in a clear box in the same way that it could the other stuff, but feels like it carries some wisdom. And that journey, saying yes to that journey, is what really begins an individual's process of deeper soul emergence. And my sense is that that's what's happening collectively now as well. You know, we are collectively, and we have been for decades now, having it, become very clear in our faces that our regular way of doing things just does not work anymore, environmentally, geopolitically, socially. It's like the issues that we're facing are unavoidable, and they're not going anywhere unless there's a shift or change in us. And my sense is that there's a deeper emergence of the collective soul that's being asked of us at this time.
Yeah, that's me coming to you today from a very palpable collective crisis, because my life is crumbling, and the life of people around me and close to me, and in a broader scope collective on a national level, that's a huge crisis, and the old way of doing things doesn't work, and we are in pain. And when the old world, all the structures that worked for us there, they disappeared. And I feel this moment as we could listen to something more. And yeah. And it's like, it's a possibility, because everything's possible now. You could talk to people of how you're feeling, when before it was sort of unacceptable. And now we're coming closer together, and that's something that is helping through these shocking times. And we've been speaking of, like one human being, entity, personality, and soul. And can we say that we could have personality and soul on a collective levels, like a group, or in our instance, a country? Could you speak to the different scales of these organisms?
Yeah, sorry, you cut out a little bit there, but like, the question was, could I list the different scales of these organisms?
Yeah, could I find Russia's personality and Russian soul? That is a broad term. I usually use it, but like, what does it mean for like a bigger organism or a collective being to have it?
Yeah. So, in integral theory, you mentioned before integral theory, so that's a kind of philosophical, intellectual approach to understanding things, to understanding truth and understanding how things work in the world. There's an idea which is taken on by a philosopher, I think his name is Arthur Koestler, who spoke about, reality is made up of what he called holons. And holons are basically the understanding that reality is neither made up of just individual separated parts, or just one indivisible whole, at least at a relative level, but is made up of a nested hierarchy of parts, which are parts of a bigger whole, 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 and so on. So an easy way to imagine that is like, you have atoms, and each atom in a certain way could be said to be a whole thing, an individual thing that is part of a molecule. And a molecule, from one angle, could be said to be a whole thing, that's part of a cell. And a cell is a whole thing that's part of an organism. And an organism is a whole thing that's part of a species, and ... right? So you could say that, that's that greater and greater scale of things just goes on and on. And human beings are whole things that are parts of families, and families are parts of societies and nations, and on and on. And in some of the spiritual teachings that we work with, the understanding is that there are such things as national souls, and that there's national personalities, and that a nation has a nation is a collective of people who essentially are all within a field that is resonant with some particular quality or set of qualities, some particular set of some particular set of ingredients that the evolutionary process is playing with, essentially, you could say, you know, and therein lies the difference in national cultures. And of course, differences in culture don't always follow differences of national borders, but there are definite differences in culture that often go with different nationalities. And so, yeah, the understanding would be that nations are even, you know, vehicles for the evolutionary process at a particular phase. And nations in a certain way have a soul quality, just as they also have a personality quality. And, you know, the personality quality of a nation would be the national scale of where actually we're just quite interested in our thing working out. Thanks very much. You know, and just like for an individual, like if I'm in my personality, then I'm pretty much interested in my agenda working out. And if you get in the way of that, I'm a bit annoyed, you know, and I'm trying to deal with you in a way which makes sure that my agenda works out, maybe in a polite way, maybe in an impolite way, but really I'm interested in my agenda, you know, and that happens, you know, there are obviously abundant examples of that being how international relations work, right? Where nations are in tension with each other, are butting heads with each other, are at, you know, kind of struggling with each other to just get their agenda done, you know, because, and to operate from a place of like, about our national needs, our national kind of agenda, our national security, and so on. And there is a healthy dimension to that at a certain process, you know, like having a deeper soul process emergence doesn't mean that you become reckless with your personal safety or your national safety. You know, it's healthy to have a caring, you know, kind of considerate relationship for one's own needs and impulses and, you know, sensed path forward on an individual or a national level. But it becomes problematic when that's what's always driving, you know, when it's just about that, then we basically just end up in a never ending cycle of, you know, kind of best case scenario, you know, well, yeah, it's just ongoing tensions because, you know, we're not actually plugged into something bigger. And the soul dimension of a nation would do that. The soul, whilst the soul dimension of an individual, in a certain way, it invites the blossoming of the qualities of the individual in a way that plugs them into the whole and their participation in something greater. The same would be the case for a national soul, that, you know, the soul of a nation is like, what are the qualities that are the gift and the opportunity of that nation to bring to the whole and to serve the greater whole in a way that takes us all forward, you know, but through a giving of their unique gifts. So, so, you know, Russia, United States, all the other, whatever, 197 countries in the world or whatever, would each, you know, could be looked at through this lens of like, what are those qualities of the national soul there, or the and qualities of the personality layer as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And could you address the teachings on those particular flavors that we could have for the personality and the soul? And being Russian, I'm interested in our.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. So, you know, I'm British. I'll start with that. Like, so, you know, it's said that Britain has, you know, a personality structure where its qualities are like very much about will and power in certain ways, and you can see that having played out through the British Empire, you know, and the British colonizing, essentially, like going and colonizing other nations, believing that they're doing them a favor by colonizing them. You know, now we're this civilizing force that's going to go into tribes in Africa or in India or whatever, and basically, you know, kind of take over, and that's our gift to you. Thank you very much. You know, like, and obviously there's other things that can be said about the British personality. You know, like we have all sorts of strange quirks and, you know, kind of areas of dysfunctionality and so on, and gifts in our personality layer. But for me, you know, the British soul, there's a quality of love there. There's a simple kindness and quality of love. Like, I know for me, when I'm in contact with it, it's very beautiful for me. Like, there's this very friendly, loving, welcoming, warm, outgoing love. And I think that, you know, there are times in the history of Britain where that's shown up, and I actually feel something emerging more in that recently. But yeah, it's just there's a gift, there's an impulse to just give and to serve and to show up and to help. And yeah, and obviously every nation is in a battle in a certain way, as when we could put it, between how much they're run by their personality and how much their soul qualities are emerging as well, just like that's the case for many individuals. So for Russia, the way, you know, I understand this, and from the teachings that we work with, it would be said that Russia, the personality quality of Russia, interestingly, is actually understood to be the same as the United States, which is interesting, because there's, you know, those are the two major kind of the countries have major tension with, right? And that quality would be like idealism and devotion, and a devotion to an ideal. And you can see that in the fact that both Russia and America are nations founded essentially around an ideal. Like, there is an ideal of what constitutes the best model of society that that is so core to the national psyche or the national culture in a certain way, you know. And the problem, the challenge between them is that they're very different, you know. But I remember reading something a while ago which was making the point that actually the number of nations in the world that where there's such a deep commitment to an ideal of society is really not so many, you know. And there's something happening there. So it's like there's idealism, devotion to an ideal is understood to be part of the Russian personality, but the Russian soul, the quality that's understood to exist there is very much around like the sacred nature of embodiment and of earth and of matter, and what it means to really be deeply embodied, connected to our senses, connected to the earth that we're living on, connected to the sacred nature of what it means to be embodied earthed beings, and to participate in the wider natural system of which we're a part. And, you know, I don't know if it was you actually, Katya, who I had a conversation about this with at some point a while ago, and I'm not sure if this was you, but I think it was you, yeah. And I asked you, where do you see that? Like, if you look into Russia and you sense into Russia, where do you see that? And I think one of the things you said was you were speaking about the kind of the shamanic history of Russia and the shamanic traditions in Russia, and some other pieces as well. But yeah, there's something in the Russian soul which is said to have some of these deep qualities related to the sacred nature of our embodiment, the sacred nature of earth, the sacred nature of what it means to be embodied, grounded beings in connection with the earth and the natural system we're a part of. Yeah. And I'm interested how that lands for you.
Yeah, if I take your hint, and I'll start with the personality, that would, it's like, this is the right way to do things, and somebody else knows how. It's either a mother, father, or a teacher, or the czar, or the president. So someone else, and like, that's the right way to do things. We're gonna go and do them. And it's kind of like a joking way we often utilize it, like, our Barin knows best. And when I'm speaking of the soul eruptions, or like the waves that are coming, at first, that's the very special way we feel the land. I mean, we are a vast
mm,
country. When I go
mm,
somewhere and there's like, you just like one car ride and you're at the border, and it's more or less the same. And for us, it's like the diversity and the beauty and the bountiful quality to it, because you have all sorts of climates, all sorts of natural resources, all sorts of like fields, plains, forests, rivers. It's just, so rich and
mm, mm, mm,
um we didn't we didn't really like conservate the shamanic aspect, because we also did like coming from the west to the east, kind of bringing up the cultured way of doing things. So with Christianity, we've been, grinding it. And maybe there is, in the 90s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, it felt like, this sort of eruption of this really unheard of freedom, that like unbelievable freedom of speech and, expression in all the ways,
mm,
and even sexuality that was like open on the TV and not prude, but alive.
mm, mm, mm.
So yeah, that's where I would go, like that kind of flavor and direction I would tune into.
Beautiful. So Katya, I have to jump off for today, but it's been a pleasure to have this conversation with you, and I'm open for us to continue to explore the truths of the Russian soul and the particular gifts that it has for humanity as a whole. Another time, I would find that a very rich,
Yeah.
yeah, inquiry and exploration.
Thank you very much for your time. That's been
Yeah, a pleasure.
grateful. Bye bye. Hey guys, bear with me a couple more minutes. I have said bye to Jon, but I'm new to managing this kind of interviews, so my timing was a little bit off, and I needed to ask Jon one last question, which is, how do I feel into my soul? How do I listen to the nation's soul? I mean, practically. So here's a couple hints from Jon, and it is basically to ask yourself, how do I connect to my innermost, deepest self? For some people, it may be meditation. For others, that could be walks in nature or swimming or dance. So basically, what do is we create a space where we quiet the usually busy mind and allow for the innermost guidance and inquiry surface that is in natural, ever-present space, which is there. But what we do is we are creating a more of a still space. And each one of us knows it's better because it's inside. It's an inner knowledge. It's inner guidance. So what works personally for Jon is meditation and concentrating on the crown. That is where it's said the soul is residing in the abstract mind, and above and on top of our heads. And sometimes Jon would ask questions and bring some inquiries, or sometimes just resides in this ever-present light and quality of love that soul brings. For others, it may be different. For example, for me personally, this feeling comes in contact with people. It's when I know that you know what I know. This kind of prior understanding and connection prior to any thoughts, movement, sound, or words. In terms of contacting the national soul, what Jon knows from those people who worked with it more thoroughly is finding ways to connect to the history of sacred places and spaces of the nation, to really feel into this. So what came to my mind in terms of contacting the nation soul, it may be looking into the history line and maybe finding those bursts of new ideas, something that's sort of coming from the future, like the unconventional thinkers or shifts in the way we're doing things. And I suspect that for a lot of people, those accent points in the history of the country would be different. It's like through my life, I really felt connected to this political leader, to this historian, to this activist, or maybe we could connect through the works of thinkers and dreamers. So my personal would be like I see a huge shift happened when Peter the Great brought, the new way of organizing the whole empire. He brought bureaucracy and law and order and ways and mechanisms for the huge country to work together as a beautiful mechanism, well oiled. We also had this, the new Euro burst and with the establishment of the USSR, and it was a beautiful dream of bringing communism where everyone brings what they can and receives what they need. And it sort of worked kind of for some time, but then again, the personality got the impression from the soul and sort of it crumbled. And now I'm saying Peter the Great brought bureaucracy, but what we have now is bureaucracies, sort of kind of a swampy feeling to it. That's how it doesn't work, but it could ideally work properly. And a definite voice of the soul for me comes through the works of Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. Really, reading them, I'm soaking in it. All the problems that come with it and all the beauty. So we could start with The Resurrection by Tolstoy, then War and Peace, Anna Karenina, his philosophical works. And when we're talking of Dostoevsky, that would be for me the Karamazov's brothers, Idiot, who's brought the soul, basically, Mishkin, and also The Devils. Thanks for being with us, listening to us, and I have huge gratitude to Jon for bringing his wisdom and sharing his experience. I hope it helps. And what I'm looking forward to is bringing different thinkers and movers and event holders to help us connect to the individual and our collective soul deeper.